Hello, everybody. So I'm going to do a little bit of dive into chapter 4, which is all about labor and financial markets. And I'm going to hit some of the key points, but I'm just going to kind of do like I did in chapter 3. I've drank like 2 bottles of water in between videos, so I'm hoping that my voice doesn't start to go again. But I'm going to do kind of like I did in chapter 3. So I'm going to go over some good examples that kind of enforce what your textbook talks about. And so I know y'all have probably read by now or will plan on reading. And so I'm just going to kind of piggyback on some of your textbook information to kind of, once again, bring some of that information home. I'm going to share my screen. I'm just going to have some of your PowerPoints up in the background so I can make sure to not forget to cover some just basic terms that I just don't want you, I want you to be familiar with as kind of I talk through it. And that way you can kind of listen to me and look at your screen and kind of get the best of both worlds, if you will. So I'm going to share this with you. All right. So one thing this mentions, and it's really good to think about, is how it mentions like demand and supply are often thought of as in relation to goods or services, but labor markets really do work in the same way. So, and I like to bring that to your attention because, you can analyze them in the same way. And your book gives a really good example of the nursing labor market. So make sure that you check that out as well. Okay, so I am going to talk about paying outside of equilibrium, if you will, when it comes to the labor market. And so something I want you to think about is, and this you should be able to relate to, I believe. So, a challenge often faced by markets is really to find equilibrium and settle down on an equilibrium quantity and price. So in the labor markets, this means it may take time to figure out what the true equilibrium wage is for a given market. And in the real world, we see some markets that seem to have like continuous shortages of labor, while others have continuous surplus of labor. And so, think today, I feel like post-COVID, we've had lots of shortages of labor. I have been to multiple restaurants where they've closed the dining room because they didn't have enough people to work. And there's been some other various, markets and areas where that has happened too. But I've seen it a lot in the restaurant realm, if you will. So I want you to think about a few things. I'm going to have you think about one benefit and drawback for a market paying above that equilibrium wage. Okay. I want you to think about one benefit and one drawback for the market paying below that equilibrium wage. And then, and so think about that as I'm going to kind of explain to you as some things that benefits and downfalls that I see. And here's some terms for you to look at. So just in case that you forgot as far as what equilibrium is when we're referring to the labor market. And so some benefits of above the equilibrium wage, right? So it's a larger, more talented pool, right? So the more money you're willing to pay, the more people you're going to draw in, right? Higher wages for workers, right? So that makes them feel more appreciated, less stressed over finances. And typically, the happier your employees, the less stressed they are, you'll have more productive workforce in general, okay? Some drawbacks of paying above the equilibrium wage is that it really does lower profits for the firm. The more money I'm paying my employees, the less money the company is bringing in itself, okay? Higher unemployment. So, a lot of students may complete a training program, then enter the labor force without a job available for new potential employees, if you will. So those are some benefits and drawbacks of paying that above the equilibrium wage, paying below the equilibrium wage, right? So there's some benefits to that. typically you have a more dedicated workforce. So really the only people who work in a field are those who really want to be in the field. So if you are, have some workers that that really like what they do, a lot of them will continue to do that because they like it, not necessarily because they're getting paid well. I'll give you some examples. Think of all of our teachers. A lot of people say our teachers are underpaid. This is not for a debate. I'm just giving an example. But a lot of teachers do it because they love it, all right, or they wouldn't be doing it. Same with our police officers, right? For the most part, a lot of people think they're underpaid. They do it because they love it. All right. So it's just some things to think about as you're thinking about below equilibrium wage, right? So training programs also can offer job guarantees, meaning that students who really complete the programs in the field are likely to get a job upon graduation, right? So those are some benefits to paying below equilibrium wages in those scenarios. Some, drawbacks might be potentially, creates a less talented and smaller labor pool, because the people that are more talented, that go get the additional education and whatever that looks like, might not be willing to take anything below that equilibrium wage, right? So it's kind of contrary on the other side of the benefits, but it's the other side of the coin. So, a lot of times if there's, openings, you may get more workers who are desperate for a job in general and are less marketable job candidates. Okay. So if they're less marketable, they might be willing to take what they can get. And since workers are typically making less money when you're paying that below the equilibrium wage, they may be less productive at work due to financial stress at home or whatever that looks like for them. Okay. And so that's kind of what some things to think about and that we can apply to our own lives when we were talking about paying people outside of that equilibrium, whether they're making more or less than that. Okay. So I'm going to scroll down just a little bit where in your book it talks about salaries, wages, minimum wages, and living wages. These are concepts or terms that we are all familiar with, or more than likely are. All right. Minimum wage is a great example of a price floor. So the minimum, an employer can, or a company can pay you legally. Okay. So it is illegal for someone to get paid less than that minimum wage. That is why a lot of servers, make a very small amount, whether it's 2 something an hour or whatever that looks like, and then they work for tips. Well, if that server does not make, if their tips plus their small hourly wages do not equal that minimum wage, then the company, whether it be restaurant or whatever it looks like, has to make up to get to that minimum wage, because there's that legal price floor, if you will. All right. So salary wage, money paid to actually work. You have the minimum wage, which is that bare minimum that someone or company can legally pay you. And then we have the living wage. So the amount that a full-time worker would need to make or afford the essentials of life. So food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, etc. All right. So when we hear living wage, all right, I'm going to talk about a couple of things that I want you to think about. All right. So we hear discussions regarding policy, the phrase living wage, and a lot of times it comes up. Okay. A lot of times we'll hear minimum wage, and a lot of people will argue that minimum wage is not equal to a living wage. It's not enough to be sustainable on, if you will. And so it's kind of the context of the universal basic income. So as we expand, as I want to expand a little bit on living wage, kind of from a local to nationwide discussion, you run into some challenges. All right. So I want you to think of, so when you think of, I want you to pick a challenge that you feel like would make it difficult, or think of a challenge that you think it would make it difficult to define a set living wage, right, across the nation. Okay. And, think about why this challenge really creates difficulty, maybe some obstacles that might make it create, or obstacles it makes to kind of create good policies. Think about it, kind of all that as I get into a little bit more. All right. So when we think about living wages, commonly mentioned by politicians, you'll hear it in the media outlets, etc. You'll hear different things. All right. I know over the years, I've seen lots of protests about minimum wages, that it's not living wages. So you kind of hear a lot of different things kind of all over the place. All right. So we hear that in Arkansas, right? Is it the same in New York City? Is it as in Arkansas? Or, different things that you can think about, all right? Do some people have skills that can help a dollar go further? Maybe someone with a green thumb can live with less money than a person who struggles with gardening because they can grow their own goods, or, whatever that looks like, all right? So the difficulty really could make a challenge for a policy, since voters will not necessarily understand what other people view kind of as acceptable. All right. And so just think, $15 an hour would buy you a lot more here in Arkansas than $15 an hour in New York City. All right. And also, if you think about, if you are a super handy person, all right, you might be able to live for less than someone that doesn't have any types of those skills, because if someone that doesn't have any types of those handy skills would have to pay somebody to do all of that. Okay. So there's different things, challenges, issues, things to think about that really go into living wages, because it looks different for everybody. So the argument is never going to be the same. The argument can be the same, but the things that go into it are not, which doesn't, make the argument constant across the board. All right. So some things that I kind of wanted you to think about when we talk about living wages. All right. Just an example of living wage graphs, if you will. All right. Another thing that I want to talk about is the labor market regulation challenges. All right. And so, we have faced a lot of labor market regulations, typically, proposed with the intention of really helping workers. All right. And to just think about some of the regulations that you may be familiar with, or that you've at least heard of. All right. Some popular ones just off the top of my head. So think minimum wages, benefit requirements, OSHA, safety standards, overtime regulations. You'll hear a lot of companies say that they're not able to pay overtime for whatever that, for whatever reason that is, etc. All right. So just to kind of piggyback on what we've been talking about. But for the most part, the benefit, any of those benefit, minimum wage, benefit requirements, OSHA regulations or safety regulations, overtime regulations, etc., the benefit would be the intention of the policy. All of these policies are intended to benefit the employee, to help them in some form or fashion. All right. But they all have drawbacks, right? So it could result in lower employment, all right, or higher unemployment. Employers being less willing to hire younger workers, or the opposite, hire older workers. All right. So there's just different things that kind of go into the labor market regulations and challenges that really do go into that. All right. And the last thing that I kind of want to hit today for chapter 4 is the intertemporal decision making. All right. So deciding when to consume goods now or in the future. And I really want to talk about this because I think it's very relevant for each of us. Okay. And there's, a lot of times that when we are trying to decide, should we buy something now? Should we buy it later? We kind of all go through that. So I just wanted to hit on that for just a second. All right. So think about a good that you may want to purchase at some point in your life. All right. So, if it's something that you really have to think about, this is typically a larger purchase. All right. And I wanted to bring this up because, the relevancy is, the talk around is, the interest rates are kind of terrible right now. So if you go to buy a house right now, it is not they are not in your favor because they are pretty high. And so I just thought this was kind of something good to bring up, as it kind of piggybacks off of some things that we talked about in chapters 1 and 2. But think about how change of interest rates may lead to a change in what or when you purchase something over time. All right. So let's say that you've been saving to buy a house, and you had planned on buying a house in early 2023. Maybe you've paid off some things, and you've kind of got a certain amount saved, maybe to put down for PMI or whatever that looks like for you. Okay. And then here comes 2023, and the interest rates skyrocket. And now they were 3.5, and I haven't looked at what the current interest rate is today. So let's just say they're 7. They've doubled. Okay. That makes a huge difference in your mortgage payment. So then you think, is it really a good time to buy a good, or should I wait till the future? All right. So, a lot of times lower interest rates would lead to, in this case, deciding, if I want to buy a house today, or if I want to wait until tomorrow or next year, or whatever that looks like for you. In the case that if you are ready to buy a house and you've saved your money and the interest rates drop today, you might be ready to jump on it, assuming that you have the perfect house found and all that goes into it. Okay. And so I'm going to give you an example here for me, that the last time I bought a car, which has been a few years, I think 2015, I didn't necessarily need a new car. Like, the car I had was fine. It was running. I didn't really have any issues with it. The main issue was it didn't have a lot of room. It had bucket seats in the back. It was a Mustang. And so it just didn't have a lot of room. And at the time we were thinking about having a kid, which, car seat made it harder. So my husband was not kind of on to me about looking for a new car, but I didn't have a car payment because I'd had my Mustang for a while, and I really wasn't ready for a car payment. And I had always said that, maybe I'll just save money and pay cash, because I did, when you factor in those interest rates that they charge you when you go to buy a car, you pay quite a bit more for your car. All right. And so when we went shopping, I found a deal at Crane, just to be specific, and they were doing 0% interest rates. It was just a special they were doing. And so I jumped on it. Like, I had already been thinking about buying a car. And so it wasn't just oh my gosh, 0% interest rate, I'm going to buy a car. So I'd already been thinking about it. But when I was going to buy that car was the question. And so when I saw they were having 0% interest rates, and then they also factors in had the car, or could get me a car that I actually wanted, after doing a lot of test drives and whatnot, I decided to go ahead and buy that car because of the 0% interest rate. Okay. And so just a good example of intertemporal decision making, and how, do we buy something now? Do we buy it later? Had it been the opposite, had it been I went to look for cars and the interest rate was 5% or something outrageous to me anyways, when you're going to buy a car, then I probably would have waited, because I was in not desperate need of a car. So I could have driven that Mustang longer, even though it didn't fit a lot of people. It just meant that I didn't drive a lot of people. So, that's just kind of a good example of that. And so once again, you expect opposite with higher interest rates. You'll probably hold off on your purchase, just like if you were thinking about buying a house. I know a lot of people are kind of holding off because they don't want to pay that high interest rate that you're going to pay if you finance a house right now. And so that's kind of where how intertemporal decision making is, and how we can kind of factor it into our own lives. Once again, I do think I disappeared when I shared my screen. Anyways, so that is kind of the highlights, or some high points I wanted to kind of hit on in chapter 4. I have put some other video resources in your shell as well, to kind of hone in on some different areas of chapter 4. But anyways, I hope this was helpful for everybody. And I will be chatting with you all soon. Have a great day.